Okay, in this video, we're going to start speccing out what is it that we need in combat, and we're going to draw a whole bunch of pretty yellow lines on our screenshots here to show what we do when we click on an enemy, when we click near to an enemy, what do we do with range and with melee, and we're going to be getting in the build, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit of what's coming down the pipe that Ben's going to start implementing on how to address things like how do we stop the player a certain distance from the enemy so that you can attack them whether it's melee or ranged. So we need to have a think about what we need with the player and the enemies and how the player attacks the enemies. So what I'm going to do is I've gone and laid out a couple of enemies just to say, I see the player running in and having combat here, and what if there's an enemy that's standing up on a ledge, and what if the player's here and has to run around the corner of some obstacles to hit the enemy. What do we do in that instance? And what if there's an enemy up on a ledge? So the first part is to place down some enemies and to say, yeah, this is how combat would probably go in this situation. And then the next step, I'm going to hit play, is to run in here and say, okay, here's my character. We've got walking, we've got movement. That's pretty cool. I've placed some enemies. What do I want to have happen? Now, in our game, we're going to have two predominant attacks. One is where I run up and I hit the enemy with a melee weapon, with a sword or a club. So I need to run up and get close. So the behavior is run to enemy, start attacking. And we're also going to have ranged, whether that's spells or bows and arrows, and that will be run to a point that's a distance from the enemy and start attacking. So that's already two fairly specific behaviors that we're going to need. And let me just do this from the perspective of sketching this up and saying, what are our specifications? What are our design requirements? So I'm going to go to my fancy Windows 10 sketch screen here, which basically is just a way of taking a screenshot. And I want you guys to do this as well. In a moment, I'm going to set you a challenge for doing this, but just watch while I do one or two examples where we specify the behavior with a little bit of a diagram so we've thought about it. Say, for example, I think our most standard case is going to be, I want to attack this enemy. So I'm going to put an X here that says I'm clicking on it. This is signifying a click. I'm going to call this number 1. I'll show you why in a second. And we want the player to run down and attack. That's pretty much it. So run to a spot that's right next to the enemy and attack. So I'm going to make some notes over here. Number 1. And this is sort of wireframing in a way, but it's wireframing within your prototype, so you don't have to sketch up all these things. You just go in, take a screenshot, and then write your notes for it. So run to enemy, and then what do? We attack. Attack. Attack melee, we'll call it, or melee. Attack melee. So that's our just most simple attack design. Now, let's go for a slightly less simple attack design, which is we want to attack this guy over here, but we've got ranged in place. So I've clicked on him, and we need the player to stop before they get there. There's no point running all the way up to that point. So, we'll have a dot somewhere around here. So this is where they've clicked. So I've got run to enemy. I'm going to put the X there to show it's a click. And then attack melee, we'll do that as a dot. You can do whatever system your heart desires, particularly if it's just you. But it's good to write it down. And this is where we want to run to enemy. And that's with the X. And then stop at and then shoot, basically. Stop and shoot. So these notes you should be able to understand. This 1, 2, and so on. Now, what we're going to do at this point is you are going to create your attack scenarios. So add placeholder enemies, go into your scene, and your scene's going to start looking different to mine. Your combat sandbox or your mini village, as I'm creating, it's going to look different to mine. Add some enemies. Take a screenshot and add your design requirements. Think about things like the player running, the player attacking, ranged, melee, what happens if the enemy is up on a ramp, what happens if they are trying to run away, and so on. Just try to think through all the situations in your game, and if you're like, I don't even know what I want to do for this, then go have a look at the games that are similar to the sort of game you're making. If you're making a Diablo-style game, as we are, go have a look at Diablo and see all the situations. What happens if there's a flying enemy? Are you going to have flying enemies in your game? And think through some of those scenarios. Don't worry about getting all of them for now. Just get the main ones. And then be sure to save your notes, because we're going to use this in the future as getting into a good habit of documentation. So go do that now. Just craft out your attack scenarios, or at least what the player needs to be doing. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you had good success with that. Here's what I've got that I did from this one screen. I'm now in Photoshop, you might see, because my Windows 10 thing was misbehaving. And I've got 1 we talked through, 2 we talked through, 3 I'm just noting in here behavior where if we click to this spot, the player runs all the way to there and ignores the enemy. So, some games, whenever you get within range of the enemy and the enemy attacks you, the player says, oh, I better attack back. I don't want that in my game, so I'm just making note of that. So when we implement it from a development point of view, we know not to worry about that behavior. I've also got in here a 4th thing, which is number 4, if I write it in, which is if I click on this enemy at the back, I want to go around to gracefully avoid this enemy in front here. Again, some games or some ways we could code this would be just run as soon as you touch an enemy, start bopping them on the head. We don't want to do that. We want to be very enemy specific. There'd be the same behavior if I was doing ranged as well, but in this instance I've just noted it as melee. Now what we don't have in this situation is what are we going to do? Move my thing out of the way. What are we going to do from controller? For controller. So for now, I'm just going to make a note of melee should be pretty much as it is. Run up, run up, run up, and then click on a guy. Actually, you know what? It's let's think through this. So when we have a mouse and keyboard, we're moving around a cursor. We'll do a little sword there. Moving around it's more like a cursor than a sword. We actually click on the enemy and it says go do that behavior. With the controller, it's more a case of do something now. So it would be an attack button, which would be just basically swing now, which is swing or shoot now. Swing, shoot. And what do we want to have with that behavior? If you're shooting, do we need to be lined up with an enemy? I think we need a little bit of precision to help the enemy out. So let's do this here, ... a cone, I think. So it would be, we'll call this 5 for now. 5 would be, so with controller, 5, controller, it would be some aim assist. Depending upon where you're looking at, some aim assist, depends on how hard it is to implement as well. Some aim assist, nearest / closest. So it's going to be different gameplay. If we've got this scenario over here, number 4, you probably can't see me waving around my mouse. Number 4 over here, with a controller, we might not actually be able to get him to go and attack the guy at the back gracefully. You might just have to plow your way through with a controller. So for now, I don't want to over-design that, overcomplicate that. It's let's put in our mouse and keyboard approach, and then put in the basic controller support, which is just click to shoot, click to attack, and we'll see how that feels. What I didn't show you guys, we'll just jump back over here very quickly, and you can write this up as well in your design, is what are you going to do in situations such as this one here? So we've got an enemy that's around the corner, and we've got an enemy that's up on a ledge. Now, what I think I'm going to say in our game is if the guy's up on a ledge, just ignore. If it's not walkable that he's standing on, if we can't get up there, then we don't want to get in this ugly situation where he tries to run over here and then say, but how do I get this guy? I can't get up there. And I think, I've talked with Ben about this, I think this is a level design problem. You wouldn't design your game so that you had this scenario. So in terms of coding, let's not try to solve it with coding. Let's just say, hey, level designer, or when you guys have your level design hat on, don't do that. Don't do this situation, because it's no good. The player doesn't know how to get up there. So let's not try to solve that in code just yet. This situation here is the one that I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with, so we'll do it without the enemy. If I say I want to go to around the corner, he kind of squeezes his way. If it's up there, he kind of, that's pretty dumb behavior. And if we're trying to make him go directly across, he doesn't know how to. So Ben and I are still discussing, are we going to do, in our point, we're going to do waypoints, are we going to do pathfinding, are we just going to do click to go? If the player can't figure out he has to click down there, then probably shouldn't be playing our game. But how are we going to solve that? So in terms of our design, what do we do if you click the enemy just there? And you guys want to start thinking about that. What do you want to do? Do you want to try to go around or make the player go around by holding down the mouse or running with the controller? And then the other one, I think that the other scenario that I've thought about here is if I can get to the enemy and I can see him, then tell the player to go run up there and do the same behavior as before, the same attack behavior, which leads me to something I want to show you guys, something pretty cool. I'm going to steal Ben's thunder a little bit. In the next video or two, Ben's going to be setting up some new player movement script aspects, which will be the move to stop radius and the attack move stop radius. Basically, what he's going to be implementing, and I'm going to turn on gizmos here. It's up in the top right of the game panel here, top right gizmos. You can see the little black dots in the line. We're going to start hooking that up so we can see exactly where he's moving to. If I click here, you can see he's moving to the dots. Now, if I click on an enemy, this guy's tagged as enemy, you see there's a second dot there, which allows us to say how far away is the dot. That is, how far away do I want to stop and start attacking. If it's range, it's a fairly large distance away. Let me move this down to 0.2. If it's melee, then when I click on the enemy, he's going to get really close and start bopping him on the head. Why is it not 0 in terms of click on the enemy and run right there? Why do we need a 0.2? It's because you tend not to attack your enemies while you're like inside their actual geometry. You need to be a little bit away so you guys can, take swings and hit at each other. That's coming down the pipe. Ben's going to get some solutions to the design parameters we've just talked about. It's great that you guys have been thinking about that. And next up, we're actually going to start hitting the enemies. Very exciting.